Nice.
This is the One Accord Podcast, and on today's episode, we're talking about Genesis chapters 27 and 28 as we continue in our biblical theology project. But before we go ahead and get to reading those chapters, why don't we go ahead and introduce the rest of our team. Here to talk with me about these interesting chapters of the Bible are Greg and Eric. Eric, how's it going today?
Well, got a little bit of a cold, so if I say anything that's absurd or incorrect, I'll do what Greg usually does, and I'll just blame it on the cold.
That's right. You know that it's not effective when Greg does it, but for you, we'll accept it. How about that? Does that sound fair?
That's fair.
I think Greg's most excited about that plan. So, Greg, how about you? How are you doing today?
I'm doing okay. I'm actually trying to get over something. So if I sound a little nasally, that's why. So I'll just say, if I say something absurd, it's because I'm generally an absurd person. So
all right. Well, I was going to say, because I'm feeling fine. So if I say anything absurd, it's just completely my fault, and you guys can nail me on it. So I'm sorry that you're both not feeling well. I do hope that you start to feel better soon. But I'm interested to get into these chapters with you, and so. After having some feedback with some people in real life, we want to include the text in the video again. And so we're going to go ahead and read through Genesis 27 and 28. If you are already really familiar with these chapters, you can go ahead and skip on to the next chapter or hit that timestamp. We'll put that on the video as well. But let's read the text before we talk about the text. Now it came about, when Isaac was old and his eyes were too dim to see, that he called his older son Esau and said to him, "My son." And he said to him, "Here I am." Isaac said, "Behold now, I am old, and I do not know the day of my death. Now then, please take your gear, your quiver, and your bow, and go out to the field and hunt game for me, and prepare a savory dish for me such as I love, and bring it to me that I may eat, so that my soul may bless you before I die." Rebekah was listening while Isaac spoke to his son Esau. So when Esau went to the field to hunt for game to bring home, Rebekah said to her son Jacob, "Behold, I heard your father speak to your brother Esau, saying, 'Bring me some game and prepare a savory dish for me, that I may eat and bless you in the presence of the Lord before my death. Now therefore, my son, listen to me as I command you. Go now to the flock and bring me 2 choice young goats from there, that I may prepare them as a savory dish for your father, such as he loves. Then you shall bring it to your father, that he may eat, so that he may bless you before his death.' Jacob answered his mother Rebekah, 'Behold, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man, and I am a smooth man. Perhaps my father will feel me. Then I will be as a deceiver in his sight, and I will bring upon myself a curse and not a blessing.' But his mother said to him, 'Your curse be on me, my son. Only obey my voice and go, get them for me.' So he went and got them, and brought them to his mother, and his mother made savory food such as his father loved. Then Rebekah took the best garments of Esau, her elder son, which were with her in the house, and put them on Jacob, her younger son, and she put the skins of the young goats on his hands and on the smooth part of his neck. She also gave the savory food and the bread, which she had made, to her son Jacob. Then he came to his father and said, 'My father.' And he said, 'Here I am. Who are you, my son?' Jacob said to his father, 'I am Esau, your firstborn. I have done as you told me. Get up, please, sit and eat of my game, that you may bless me.' Isaac said to his son, 'How is it that you have it so quickly, my son?' And he said, 'Because the Lord your God caused it to happen to me.' Then Isaac said to Jacob, 'Please come close, that I may feel you, my son, whether you are really my son Esau or not.' So Jacob came close to Isaac, his father, and he felt him, and said, 'The voice is the voice of Jacob, but the hands are the hands of Esau.' He did not recognize him, because his hands were hairy like his brother Esau's hands. So he blessed him, and he said, 'Are you really my son Esau?' And he said, 'I am.' So he said, 'Bring it to me, and I will eat of my son's game, that I may bless you.' And he brought it to him, and he ate. He also brought him wine, and he drank. Then his father Isaac said to him, 'Please come close and kiss me, my son.' So he came close and kissed him, and when he smelled the smell of his garments, he blessed him and said, 'See, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field which the Lord has blessed. Now may God give you of the dew of heaven, and of the fatness of the earth, and an abundance of grain and new wine. May peoples serve you, and nations bow down to you. Be master of your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you.' Now it came about, as soon as Isaac had finished blessing Jacob, and Jacob had hardly gone out from the presence of Isaac his father, that Esau his brother came in from his hunting. Then he also made savory food and brought it to his father, and he said to his father, Let my father arise and eat of his son's game, that you may bless me. Isaac, his father, said to him, Who are you? And he said, I am your son, your firstborn, Esau. Then Isaac trembled violently, and said, Who was he then that hunted game and brought it to me, so that I ate of all of it before you came and blessed him? Yes, and he shall be blessed. When Esau heard the words of his father, he cried out with an exceedingly great and bitter cry, and said to his father, Bless me, even me also, O my father. And he said, Your brother came deceitfully, and has taken away your blessing. Then he said, Is he not rightly named Jacob? For he has supplanted me these 2 times. He took away my birthright, and behold, now he has taken away my blessing. And he said, Have you not reserved a blessing for me? But Isaac replied to Esau, Behold, I have made him your master, and all his relatives I have given to him as servants, and with grain and new wine I have sustained him. Now as for you then, what can I do, my son? Esau said to his father, Do you have only one blessing, my father? Bless me, even me also, O my father. So Esau lifted his voice and wept. Then Isaac his father answered and said to him, Behold, away from the fertility of the earth shall be your dwelling, and away from the dew of heaven from above. By your sword you shall live, and your brother you shall serve. But it shall come about when you become restless, that you will break his yoke from your neck. So Esau bore a grudge against Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, The days of mourning for my father are near, then I will kill my brother Jacob. Now when the words of her elder son Esau were reported to Rebekah, she sent and called her younger son Jacob, and said to him, Behold, your brother Esau is consoling himself concerning you by planning to kill you. Now therefore, my son, obey my voice, and arise, flee to Haran, to my brother Laban. Stay with him a few days, until your brother's fury subsides, until your brother's anger against you subsides, and he forgets what you did to him. Then I will send and get you from there. Why should I be bereaved of you both in one day? Rebekah said to Isaac, I am tired of living because of the daughters of Heth. If Jacob takes a wife from the daughters of Heth, like these from the daughters of the land, what good will my life be to me? So Isaac called Jacob and blessed him and charged him, and said to him, You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan. Arise, go to Paddan Aram, to the house of Bethuel your mother's father, and from there take to yourself a wife from the daughters of Laban your mother's brother. May God Almighty bless you and make you fruitful and multiply you, that you may become a company of peoples. May he also give you the blessing of Abraham to you and to your descendants with you, that you may possess the land of your sojournings, which God gave to Abraham. Then Isaac sent Jacob away, and he went to Paddan Aram to Laban, son of Bethuel the Aramean, the brother of Rebekah, the mother of Jacob and Esau. Now Esau saw that Isaac had blessed Jacob and sent him away to Paddan Aram to take to himself a wife from there, and that when he blessed him, he charged him, saying, You shall not take a wife from the daughters of Canaan, and that Jacob had obeyed his father and his mother and had gone to Paddan Aram. So Esau saw that the daughters of Canaan displeased his father Isaac, and Esau went to Ishmael and married, besides the wives that he had, Mahalath the daughter of Ishmael, Abraham's son, the sister of Nebaioth. Then Jacob departed from Beersheba and went toward Haran. He came to a certain place and spent the night there, because the sun had set, and he took one of the stones of the place and put it under his head, and lay down in that place. He had a dream, and behold, a ladder was set on the earth with its top reaching to heaven, and behold, the angels of God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and to your descendants. Your descendants will also be like the dust of the earth, and you will spread out to the west and to the east and to the north and to the south. And in you and in your descendants shall all the families of the earth be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to this land. For I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised you. Then Jacob awoke from his sleep and said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. He was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. So Jacob rose early in the morning, and took the stone that he had put under his head and set it up as a pillar and poured oil on its top. He called the name of that place Bethel. However, previously the name of the city had been Luz. Then Jacob made a vow, saying, If God will be with me and will keep me on this journey that I take, and will give me food to eat and garments to wear, and I return to my father's house in safety, then the Lord will be my God. This stone, which I have set up as a pillar, will be God's house, and of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. All right, well, to get into our first issue from Genesis chapter 27, we see here Isaac's desire to bless his son Isaac. This is a very interesting passage. Isaac obviously is taking it very seriously. This seems to be a very significant moment. Eric, why don't you start us off with kind of how you read Isaac's desire to bless his son?
Yeah, just for clarification purposes, Isaac wanted to bless Esau.
What did I say?
You said the first time Isaac wanted to bless Isaac.
That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, no, thank you for... See, there we go. I'm not feeling good, you guys. Give me a break.
No problem. No problem. Well, this is an interesting question because it's like the whole family, Isaac, Rebekah, Esau, Jacob, they seem to have believed that this blessing was very significant. And they seem to believe that God was for sure going to honor Isaac's blessing. And no one had any doubt about that. They took it as a certainty. And then I was wondering, why were they so certain? What made them so certain about this? Because, if I sat down and wanted to bless my kids, I don't know that anyone would probably take it, incredibly seriously. Maybe I'm wrong, but I look at Isaac's life, and I think that his life does shed some light on this question. Scripture tells us that Isaac knew God for most of his life. He had prayed for his wife Rebekah because she was barren, and God caused her to conceive. That's mentioned in Genesis 25:21. God also appeared to Isaac, Genesis 26:2, and later blessed him with an abundance of crops and livestock. So then the Lord appeared to him again in Beersheba. And so Isaac and his family may have been confident that God would honor his blessing because of the favor that God had shown him throughout his life. Isaac was not just anybody. He was somebody who had the favor of God. And of course, Isaac was, obedient to God. So I think my best guess is that this gave them confidence that God was actually going to honor Isaac's blessing. So it made Isaac's blessing incredibly significant for the family.
Were they being superstitious, or do you think that maybe modern people have just failed to recognize the power of our words, that the ability and power of speaking blessing, speaking curse is still a real thing, or is that just a superstitious remnant of the past? Does that make sense what I'm asking you?
It's at least a little stitious, right?
All right. Yeah.
Nice. I don't know what modern people believe. I think they believe just about anything, as long as it's not the truth. It's kind of like, as far as supernatural things go, and there are, maybe that's speaking a little bit too harshly, but there are all these different beliefs out there. I talk to people all the time, and they have all sorts of beliefs. Some people believe in science. Some people believe in different spiritual things that are outside of Christianity. But as I've said before, and I think I said this maybe a week or two ago, it seems like modern people don't, and I'm speaking generally, of course, they don't have anything to ground their beliefs. And so because they have nothing to ground their beliefs, they're kind of just grasping at the wind. And I think there was something that grounded the beliefs of those, at least of Isaac and his family. And I think it was their experience of the faithfulness of God. They saw God work in their lives. They saw him do these things over and over again. God appeared to Isaac multiple times. This was not just based on superstition. This was based on what God had done for them, and they experienced these things. So, no, they were not superstitious people. They were people whose faith was based on somewhat on experience, on God proving his faithfulness to them time and time again. And so I think their faith was grounded in God's faithfulness. I guess I would just answer it that way.
Here's a biblical narrative that's describing the importance and power of blessing. You've rightly said that they really cared about this. should we start to change our minds and say, all right, well, maybe the world doesn't care about blessing our family, but should you as a dad, should I as a dad, should we as Christians think more about this, or is that just a remnant of the past? We read plenty of things like that are just part of the narrative that they just maybe got wrong or that shouldn't be emulated. Certainly what we're going to talk about with Jacob, I don't know that we should be trying to mimic all of his activity, but everything that he was doing was to try and get this blessing. Like, this blessing was a big deal. So should we think more, I don't know, should we just think more strongly about blessing and curses or not? I guess that was my original question. If you answered it, I missed it.
Well, I didn't answer that part of it. I guess I answered the other part.
Fair enough.
I guess I personally don't see anything in Scripture that would lead me to believe that, that I have the power to pronounce a blessing the way that Jacob did. Because Isaac's the one that pronounced the blessing. Isaac's blessing was also prophetic. It wasn't simply just, God, please do these things for my children. It was actually a prophecy. So then the question could be, well, can I declare a blessing / prophecy on my family? I guess unless God tells me I can, I'm going to assume that I can't. And maybe I could be wrong about that. I could be open to correction. But that's kind of the way that I'm maybe viewing it now. Now, can we pray over our families and ask God for specific things? I do that all the time. But as far as declaring a blessing that doubles as a prophecy, I guess I would have to hear from God and be certain that God was going to honor that before I did it.
There definitely are some Christians who would say that we should prophecy over our family, and everybody should prophecy. I wouldn't be in that camp, and I know you're not either. I think that as I read the Old Testament, things like this, speaking blessing over your family, things like naming people, there just seemed like there was a lot of care in thinking that some of these, just the power of these words to in some way direct the way that things went in the future. And I don't know, modern psychology, for example, would have a thing. If I just look at one of my kids and say, "You're so stupid, you're such a good for nothing, all you ever do is get everything wrong," that sure does seem like, well, that might not be a spiritual, religious, prophetic power, but it does tend to influence the way that people think about themselves, the way that they think about the future, the conduct that they do. I had experience of that in my own upbringing, and for better or worse, the words do matter. They're not nothing. The old sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Well, that's not true. Words can hurt you. And so the idea of, I don't know, let's keep an eye out for this as we continue to read the scriptures, and especially as we get into the New Testament and see, like, is this something that Christians should pay attention to, the admonitions just to encourage, to not use our words to tear down, but to build up and stuff like that, I think is related to this theme. Maybe not getting so far to the extreme that we all can prophesy and declare the future and it'll happen, but can we have positive and negative influence on certain things simply by the power of our tongue? I think the Bible does have much to say about that, and we'll keep our eyes open for that. I'm not going to try and run us ahead too far. While we're here, your observation that you made to start us off, they seem to really care about this, and many modern people wouldn't care about this at all. I wonder if maybe we've swung too far in the opposite direction of completely throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Well, let me clarify. The way that you just described it, I would say that's absolutely true. Yes. So I just want to make that clear. Yes, our words do have power, and I want to use that carefully. I'm not talking about speaking things into existence, but I mean, how you speak to people, it absolutely affects the way they think. And I absolutely agree with you on that.
Well, I think we need to be very careful turning descriptive things into prescriptive things. This was foundational, and this was foundational to their worldview. And it is interesting, and I would want to interrogate my own thought. Why do I not? What has convinced me that there isn't something here? Now, what we should recognize is there was a blessing, there was a promise that was coming through this line. So there was some authority for which this blessing was given by God and meant to be passed on. And so it was working forward. It was declared by the Lord that there would be a blessing coming through this seed. And so whether or not maybe Isaac had the right to decide who was getting the blessing, we could argue about that, I suppose. But what I find most interesting is the question, why do I look at this as superstitious or a little stitious or whatever the case may be? What has happened in my modern mind and in the modern worldview that places this into the category of odd or, mystical or superstitious?
Well, that is an interesting question.
I don't have an answer. Yeah, I don't have an answer. And I think I don't have an answer because I don't want to go to. I mean, this again, the same thing you guys said. I don't want to go too far. I don't want to go to because Isaac had this authoritative right, which again was already declared by God. I have the authoritative right to prophetically speak future blessings upon my kids or future curses upon my kids. And then it comes down to, man, I got 7 kids. Like how do I divvy up that blessing? Again, I don't have an answer because I don't know how it works. And so I'd rather just play with the idea. Why don't I have an answer than give one?
The curious aspect, I think that on the extremes of this, like, you mentioned your 7 kids. If you named one of your kids stupid and the second one moron and the third one good for nothing, like we would probably think, well, this will probably affect them in some way. Yeah. But then, if we, there's a reason probably why people have picked names like, chastity or grace or these types of names in the past. You name people as certain attributes, but then we can get into other things that maybe don't have much meaning, or at least the meaning is forgotten. My name is a biblical name, Joseph, and it means something biblically. It means the Lord adds. Now, nobody thinks of Joe as meaning anything. It's just a regular name, and it gets, regular Joe, average Joe, whatever. But it did have, at least in the biblical sense, there was a meaning that was associated with it that gets lost over time. And then we start to, I think, I've done this, you think about names that you like, names that sound pleasant to the ear, but we don't necessarily think about the implications. And so if it would be true on the more extreme end, does it cease to be true just because we don't notice the effect? That's a question that I wrestle with, and I don't know the answer to it either. I just kind of throw it out for conversation. So any other thoughts, Greg, that you had on kind of the initial part? It adds another, if you don't, I have another follow-up question for you.
Go ahead.
So you mentioned that, okay, God had prophetically given this idea that he was going to bless one. It seemed like there was this blessing that was coming, but now Isaac is trying to give that blessing to the older. How do you interact with the way that that's being described? Like, is Isaac being disobedient here? Did he forget maybe? It's not told to us, but the part that follows afterwards, which we'll talk about next, Jacob deceiving his dad and stealing this blessing, is really just to get to what the prophecy said in the first place. So do you have any thoughts about what Isaac was trying to do? Like, was he trying to get around what God had said? Or did he just forget because he loved Esau? Or, how do you read this? Or again, I don't know as a final answer.
I guess I don't know that I've ever considered Isaac's frame of mind here. I mean, Rebecca is one that we will talk about and seems to be more talked about. To what extent Isaac understood that the older will serve the younger. I really don't know the answer to that. It seems like that'd be something that Isaac would have been aware of, and but in one sense, in an important sense, I think Isaac was doing the cultural expectation, the normal flow of events would have been blessing the older over against the younger. And it appears to me there is some favoritism going on in the family. Dad favors the older, mom favors the younger. And so there seems to be some, we'll just call it dysfunction there. So how much was this Isaac wanting to have his way for the younger or for the older over against God's expressed will? Versus how much of this is Isaac just kind of operating in what would have been standard operating procedure? I don't know. I don't know the answer to that. But my guess is there's a mix of both.
Yeah. I appreciate those thoughts. I didn't expect you to have the answer. I appreciate what you're saying. Eric, you have any thoughts on this?
Well, as I read Genesis 25, just for example, verse 22, but the children struggled together within her, and she said, this is Rebecca, if it is so, why then am I this way? So she went to inquire of the Lord. She did. The Lord said to her, 2 nations are in your womb, and 2 peoples will be separated from your body, and 1 people shall be stronger than the other, and the older shall serve the younger. Now, I could be, overlooking something here. Sometimes I do. And it sounds like God said this to Rebecca. And then the question is, well, if he said this to Rebecca, wouldn't she have told Isaac? I mean, naturally, he being her husband, you think she would have told him? And I'm not sure that it doesn't say that she did. And it doesn't really say anything about, I don't know, Isaac knowing about this, although I could be wrong. Maybe, like I said, maybe I'm overlooking something. It's more of a question. I kind of just wonder, did Isaac even know about this? It seems
I
really.
I think this falls into the realm of what I call not every question that we have gets answered by the text. And so I would say the narrative is inspired by the Holy Spirit to answer the questions, to put on display what God wanted answered and what He wanted put on display. I don't think there's anything wrong with us asking the question. I think we're free to. But at the end of the day, let's not settle in a position that says if you disagree with me here, we can't have unity over it because the text, I don't think answers the question.
Yeah. No, this is way too obscure to draw any firm conclusions.
Yeah. No, I'm not. I'm certainly not trying to get stirring up some strife between us. It's interesting to speculate about some of these things and some of the thoughts that I have, which again I would put in the same exact category. I don't know that these are the right answers. As I read these texts and I see, we'll go back to Abraham, some of the things that he did. We talked about already at length. It seemed like he was, obviously a man of faith. We know that, but also a man who, he looked at the world as what. A very natural way. And I know that he believed that God could interact, especially later in life. He believed that God could interact, but he was before he received Isaac. He seemed to think, okay, well, here's what we've already got. Lord, can we do this? And he goes into an area. He's like, well, here's how I can make sure that I'm safe. Here's the I'll kind of shade the story in a way that will work. And he grew in his ability to trust the Lord, but he started by, I would say, walking in the flesh. He saw from a naturalistic view and said, here's what we've already got. How can we make things work in this way? All right. Isaac seems to be making a different kind of mistake. And Greg, you brought it up a little bit. It does seem like it's favoritism or partiality. He clearly loved Esau more than he loved Jacob. And as a result of that, as he gets to the end of his life, now this is the oldest. He loves him and has at least a little bit more affection for him, and he wants to go according to that, to follow his heart. And whether he knew about it or not, it seems to me that the Scripture will tell us to not walk according to sight, but by faith. So that's kind of curing the problem that Abraham had early. Likewise, it'll tell us not to follow our heart, but to follow what the Lord says. And so we'll keep our eyes out for these themes, which I think will come up over and over and over again. But I think these help me, as we are all familiar with what the rest of the Scripture says, it seems like these are human patterns that I can completely understand. I've fallen into both of these patterns many, many times. So I don't say any of this stuff to beat up on Abraham or to beat up on Isaac or think that they're doing something that's, strange. What person can't relate to walking by sight rather than by trusting in what God said? Or what person can't relate to having partiality? There's just certain things or things that we like or people that we like or things that we want to happen, and we kind of we can become even blind to them. And yeah, I don't know. I don't know if she told him or not. Maybe he was acting in complete ignorance. Maybe he was trying to be more devious. I have no idea. We don't have to belabor it. If you guys got nothing else to add on that, I appreciate the conversation. I'm not sure that we answered any questions. We sure did raise some questions, but the people can comment below if they've got other thoughts. But you got anything else for us before we move on?
The only point that I would make is that's a good point, right? Like we often, as we read the text, we want to come with some sense of judgment over Isaac or Abraham or whoever. And I go, man, listen, these guys, not only do they not have the ability to look back on their own lives objectively, they don't have the rest of Scripture by which to steer themselves by. So I want to be very generous in and I do have those benefits, right? I do have the benefit of all of Scripture as an example, and I still fall into the same traps that Abraham and Isaac and every other one of them fell into. And so I want to be extremely generous as I read the text, gracious as I read the text.
No doubt. I'm not trying to cut those guys down. I'm just trying to glean what we can. I appreciate your desire to do the same. So let's go ahead and move forward just a little bit further into Genesis chapter 27. Something that definitely seems devious to me, Jacob and Rebekah scheming to steal this blessing away from Isaac to take it from Esau, the intentionality that was there, whether it was the right thing or the wrong thing, this seems definitely wrong, yet this is the means by which the prophecy is really fulfilled, and we kind of get in that direction. So any thoughts that you have about this, Greg? Let's go ahead and start with you this time of Jacob's deception to steal this blessing.
Yeah, it definitely seems wrong. So the question often is framed like this. Was Rebekah just trying to fulfill the Lord's plan, which was spoken beforehand, or was she being devious? And I guess I don't know her motivation. I think there's probably there might be a little bit of both, right? What was she acting out of a sense of faithful, kind of in a Sarah way where I'm going to do this thing in order to fulfill this promise. So I'll give Hagar, or, I'll kind of rob this. Or was this, or did God know that this was going to play out using the sinful actions of Rebekah and Jacob to get to this point? I don't have the answer to that necessarily, but it's a good question that often gets asked in the text.
Tricky question. Let me first say, Rebekah said nothing about the prophecy in Genesis 25:23 as she's doing what she's doing here. So we can't know for certain whether she had this in mind while, plotting this thing against Esau. And if she did have it in mind, it does seem strange that she thought she had to manipulate the situation in order to bring the prophecy to pass. As Greg said, we don't know for sure. I do find it interesting, though, that her plan caused Isaac to bless Jacob by making his descendants rule over the descendants of Esau. Isaac even told Esau later, I have made him your master, and all his relatives I have given to him as servants, Genesis 27:37. However, had Isaac given the blessing to Esau, I think God probably, I'm sure, God would still have kept his promise in Genesis 25:23 and made the descendants of Esau servants of the descendants of Jacob, because God always keeps his word. So I would assume that had Rebekah not orchestrated all this, God still would have kept his word. I mean, God doesn't have to honor the words of man. God can say, well, I'll honor this one part of it, but the other part, no, I don't have that in mind, so I'm just going to change my mind, or I'm going to change your desires, and I'm going to do what's in my own mind. So, again, we're dealing with hypotheticals here, but it is interesting, though, that Rebekah knew that the older was going to serve the younger, and she came up with this plan that brought that about. Strange. It's just really strange that it happened in this way. So I don't, like you guys said, I don't really have the answers, but I find it very interesting.
You kind of interacted with our next question, so I'm going to move us into that, but we can go back if we need to, especially Greg, if you have other thoughts on this that you didn't get a chance to say. But let's talk about the content of this blessing, because you're right, there are very specific things in here. Eric, you want to kind of outline the content of this blessing? And
yeah, well, we have to remember that this is dealing with two nations, not simply two men. It's dealing with the descendants of these men. And Isaac blessed Jacob, his descendants, with good, fertile land and an abundance of produce, which was very important back then, and obviously it's still important today, but that was a big deal back then. He also made Jacob's descendants master of your brothers, it says, in keeping with Genesis 25:23. So we see that we don't know how, we don't know what was in God's mind, and we don't know what was in Rebekah's mind, but we do know that this prophecy did end up coming to pass. Whatever anyone was thinking at the time, we don't know. But the last part of the blessing is nearly identical to God's promise to Abraham in Genesis 12:3. And I guess I probably should just read that briefly. This is Genesis 27, verse 29. May people serve you, and nations bow down to you. be master of your brothers, and may your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed be those who curse you, and blessed be those who bless you. That last part is the part I was talking about. That's very similar, almost identical to what God told Abraham in Genesis 12:3. And it's hard to believe that Isaac didn't have this in mind when giving the blessing. So it makes sense for him to have blessed Jacob with something that God had already promised. And maybe that's part of the reason why, Isaac was so confident that this would come to pass, because, well, God had actually already declared this. God already said, blessed are those who bless you and cursed are those who curse you. So Isaac's kind of reiterating what God had already said. So that's the blessing in a nutshell.
Yeah, I have no doubt that Isaac had in mind some framework of Abraham's blessing. I think we see that clearly. I don't want to skip ahead a whole lot, but chapter 8, verse 4, it seems clear that Isaac was well aware of Abraham's blessing and in some way intended that for Jacob. Now, when I read this, and again, how we answer the question, you brought up this was for the nations, the people of Jacob, and not necessarily exclusively Jacob himself. And I know that how we answer that will play a big role in answering future questions. As I read verses 27, 28, and 29, I see this as talking about Jacob, not necessarily all the descendants of Jacob. But that's now, does it have implications for the descendants? Sure, but I guess I'd push back a little bit, depending how hard you were pushing that this was for the descendants of Jacob. I would want to push back some and say I think this is directed a blessing on Jacob, not necessarily directed at the descendants of Jacob. But at the same time, I do see this as still a narrowing, right? A blessing was made to Abraham, and it was clear it was made to Abraham, no one else. Then it was made not to Abraham's seed, but not the son of a slave woman, but to the son of promise. And then we have the son of promise, and now we still have to winnow this down. We still have to narrow this down. So Isaac has two sons, and it's not this son, but this son. And so I do see this as kind of a funneling down still of this blessing. But I do read 27, 28, 29 as about Jacob, not about Jacob's descendants.
Well, in Genesis 25:23, the prophecy was 2 nations are in your womb, and the older will serve the younger, meaning
I understand that.
The Edomites would serve the Israelites sometime in the future. And then it even says in, like in verse 37, I know I'm getting a little bit ahead here. But it says, this is Isaac telling this to Esau, behold, I have made him your servant, or your master, and all his relatives I have given to him as servants. Now this never was fulfilled in the life of Jacob. This was well, I don't want to get too far ahead, but I think if we look for evidence that these things were fulfilled in Jacob's life, maybe like in a small a small amount, but I think we'll see as we look ahead that these things were literally fulfilled with these nations.
Sure, I have no doubt. The caution that I'm trying to throw out here is, if we're going to be, and I think we will, if we're going to be sticklers in the future over nations versus individuals versus nations, I think we're going to be sticklers later on when we get to particular points. If we're going to do that now, I don't see a reason why, as Isaac is laying his hand on Jacob and saying, I'm blessing you, my son, why we would take that and go, oh, it's not about him, it's about his descendants. Just the context here May people serve you. May nations bow down to you. Be master over your brothers. May your mother's sons bow down to you. Cursed are those who curse you, and blessed are those who bless you. Now, again, I understand and fully acknowledge that has implications for his descendants, but I believe this blessing was on Jacob. And I know that this seems like a silly point to want to be very specific, but I think it's going to matter later on.
Do we have to choose? I mean, if the blessing is upon them as individuals and then flows to the nations that come from them, do we have to be such sticklers here? I mean, is it not enough to just say, well, these individuals were blessed? That's clearly what's happening here is individuals are being blessed with very significant implications for the nations that will come from them. Do we have to pick and say, well, it's about the nations and not about the individuals? I don't think Eric's saying that. Like, I mean, the individual is being blessed. He's just bringing the nations into it. And likewise, you wouldn't say that the nations that come from them are not also blessed, even if it is the individuals who are being blessed here, right? So, I mean, both of you, I would think, would agree, and maybe it is we're just so focused on the potential future conversation that's going to come that we're trying to make sure that we recognize that, it's the nation and it is the individual. I mean, is it possible that both and is what the intention of the text is here?
As long as we aren't saying, and I'm not saying that Eric was saying this, but it sounded like he was getting close to it anyways. This isn't about Jacob. This is about the descendants of Jacob. And this isn't about Esau. It's about Esau's descendants. I think that was the point that he was getting close to if he wasn't making it already. And I just want to rein that back a little bit.
Well, I was close to that, but I would not deny that Esau and Jacob, the individuals, did receive blessings in their lifetime. And we know that they did because you go on reading the text, and God did bless them as individuals. Mostly.
And even in their lifetimes, right? Like, there was a supremacy of Jacob over against Esau, right?
That's true.
Because Jacob inherits the land, and Esau goes off to some other land, right? So there is some fulfillment in their lifetimes of this, and it's not just future.
Well, that's just it, though. That they didn't like these promises were connected to lands, right? Like, for example, it says, in Genesis 27:27, see, the smell of my son is like the smell of a field, which the Lord has blessed. Okay, 28. Now may God give you of the dew of heaven and of the fatness of the earth and an abundance of grain and new wine. Now, the fatness of the earth, it's talking about basically the best of the earth. The most plentiful, the land is fertile. It's talking about the quality of the land. And it actually says later on, it kind of like the opposite thing is said about Esau. It says in verse 39, behold, away from the fertility of the earth shall be your dwelling, and away from the dew of heaven from above. These blessings and curses, and it's not really a curse, but it's more of it's a blessing, and then the sort of a lesser statement about Esau and his descendants. These things are connected to the lands that their descendants would settle in.
But why not the lands that they eventually settle in?
Well, because if you read the story, and I don't know how much ahead to go, but Jacob and his descendants, as the prophecy of Genesis 15 tells us, don't end up in the land in Jacob's lifetime. Remember, it says back in Genesis 15. Remember, the prophecy was your descendants will be in basically a foreign land for 400 years, and then they'll enter into the land of promise. That was what God told Abraham in Genesis 15.
For most of Isaac's lifetime, he's right there. And I agree and understand and concede the fact that Isaac doesn't finish there, but neither does Esau.
No, but the point I'm making is that these promises are looking farther ahead into the future. Now, again, I'll say what I said earlier. Did God bless Jacob with, for example, livestock and other things? Well, we know that he does. But this, I think, again, 2 nations are in your womb. The older will serve the younger. I think the blessing is primarily for the nations that come from Esau and Jacob.
Yeah.
Not
And so we
as
just read
much.
it different. We just like I am not trying to take anything away from the initial prophecy in 25, but I'm also not trying to make 27 chapter 27 27 through 29 or chapter 27 39 through 40 about that future.
Well, but look at it like this too.
There's a scale, right? I think I'm trying to allow the text that's talking about the individual to talk about the individual, and the text that's talking about the nations talk about the nations, without trying to force either categorical error there. I think
So this question is for either one of you. Did the man Esau ever serve his brother Jacob?
In what regard?
In any way?
So when you say serve, you mean like, was he a servant? Was he a slave? Did he chop wood for his brother? Is that what you're asking?
Yeah. Was this? Could we say this prophecy was literally fulfilled in any sense in Jacob's lifetime? Like as far as the older serving the younger?
I think we clearly see a supremacy, a primacy of Jacob over against his brother. Yes, I think we do see that, but we'd have to continue to go ahead.
Yeah, I don't see that as, I mean, unless we say like, well, he served him by, I don't know, not killing him. I mean, I guess we could say that. But anyway,
well,
maybe I'm going too far ahead.
I think there is at least substantive agreement that, sometimes the name Jacob can be speaking of the individual, sometimes it's speaking of the nation, and sometimes it's both, sometimes it's either or. And so these are careful things to pay attention to, and we might not always agree on which passages are which, but the overall concept that we don't want to too broadly apply when it should be narrow, and we don't want to be too narrow when it should be more broad. These are things that we agree upon, and having the conversation and kind of expressing our differences, I think, is helpful to at least see the issues, even if we don't come to agreement immediately. And then, later one of you will say the other one was right, and we can admit that on the screen as we go. Is that fair to move forward for now? I mean, again, we could continue talking about this for the next 3 hours. I'm not sure that we'd come to any better agreement. So, are you guys good if we move on to our next issue?
We can move on.
All right. So Esau finds out that the blessing has been stolen. He comes in after trying to do what his dad told him to do. Let's talk about kind of Esau's response. He really wants his dad to change his mind, to go back to what he intended. He really does feel like he's robbed of something very significant, getting back to some of our earlier discussions. So any thoughts that you have about how Esau responds when he finds out that the blessing has been stolen by his brother?
Go ahead, Eric.
It's not clear from the text why the blessing could not be revoked. In verse 33, Isaac says, "Who was he then that hunted game and brought it to me, so that I ate of all of it before you came, and blessed him? Yes, and he shall be blessed." That last statement suggests that Isaac believed the blessing was certain and it couldn't be revoked. It was like set in stone. But Isaac may have altered it somewhat in his blessing to Esau when he said, "By your sword you shall live, and your brother you shall serve, but it shall come about when you become restless that you will break his yoke from your neck." That's Genesis 27:40. So even though the blessing to Jacob could not be revoked, it does seem like Isaac modified it somewhat when he was speaking to Esau. It's like the blessing could still be certain, but yet he says, well, there will come a time though when the Edomites will throw off the yoke of Israel, and so it almost sounds like to me maybe that Isaac modified it for Esau's sake, because he wanted to originally give the blessing to Esau, but yet he couldn't take back what he said to Jacob. So it sounds like he kind of limited maybe the time span that this yoke would be placed on the neck of the Edomites. So, those are my thoughts. It seems interesting that I don't know. I don't know what exactly to think about it. If that would be considered changing it, or if it would be, if that was okay to do from the beginning. I don't know. I'm not sure exactly how these blessings and things work. So Those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I think it's perfectly understandable and reasonable and probably even right that that Esau would feel robbed here, right? Here he's apparently doing exactly what he's supposed to do, listening to his father. Here he was the firstborn. The blessing was supposed to come to him, and here comes his scheming, scandalous little brother, and steals it out from underneath him. Now, again, the workings, the mechanics of this blessing, I mean, I don't know. I have no idea how this works. Why couldn't Isaac modify it? I don't know. Why? Does it look to me like Isaac is doing the best he can to carve out something for this son that he loves? Yeah, it looks like it. But regarding why it couldn't be repented of, why it couldn't be changed, I don't know.
You guys have hinted at it. Eric, can you kind of describe a little bit more of the content of the blessing that was given to Esau? And Greg, I think, made an interesting point. It's kind of what I would have said. It seems like Isaac was kind of grasping at straws. He's like, all right, what did I already say that can't be unsaid? What's the best I can do? And this is like the best I can do for you, and try and put a positive spin on this thing. But I really intended to bless you.
Sure. Yeah. Assuming the NASB translation is correct, the words in verse 39 seem to be the opposite of those in verse 28. The land of Esau's descendants would be unproductive, and consequently they'd have to resort to living by the sword. There is an alternate translation that I'm not sure. I don't know the Hebrew, so I'm not sure which one is preferable. But the NASB does translate verse 39 as away from the fertility of the earth shall be your dwelling, and away from the dew of heaven from above. So it sounds like it's the opposite of the blessing in verse 28 to Jacob and his descendants. However, the last part is more positive. Even though the descendants of Isaac would rule over the descendants of Esau, this would not be permanent. Their yoke would eventually be cast off. So it does seem like, at least on the surface, that Isaac modified this blessing to Jacob and made it only temporary rather than, everlasting. So that's as far as I can tell.
Yeah, it just falls on the translation and interpretation of a preposition.
It's interesting that there's not a similar disagreement on verse 28, unless it's a completely different preposition there.
No, I think it is actually the same preposition. The question is whether it's being used in a different sense or in exactly the same sense. And that's a deeper interpretational issue that I hadn't compared this to the King James, so I wasn't aware of that. So I would be unprepared to give a definitive answer on what I think. But the question, I guess, is some prepositions just have a wide range of meaning, and they don't necessarily have to be used in exactly the same way. So is he giving him the same blessing in some regard? Or is he giving a contrary blessing that is used as a similar structure, but then ends up kind of being like, okay, you will have of this and you will be away from this? Or is he giving them both of this, but in different ways? I'd want to look into that a little bit more. And anybody watching this, that's a type of an issue that's really helpful when you compare translations to see maybe issues that deserve a little bit more of your attention and time. And just picking whatever translation sounds better to you is not the best path. I know sometimes that's what people do. Well, this one sounds better to me. Well, that's not how you answer these questions, really. But it's a curious. Thanks for bringing it up. I appreciate that.
Yeah, most of the modern translations, it looks like they say away from the fatness of the earth, but like Young's literal translation says, "Of the fatness of the earth is thy dwelling." Smith's literal translation, ironically, it says, "From the fatness of the earth shall be thy dwelling." So even there's some divergence in the literal translations. I don't know the answer, but it does kind of make sense to me that. And again, I'm not the authority on, which one is correct. But if in his blessing to Jacob, he says, "Your land will be productive." It kind of, you would expect him to say something different about the land of the Edomites, although maybe he did. I mean, he did love Esau.
If we're willing to look ahead, right? It's my understanding that the Mount Seir region, that area, was a less productive, mountainous, not as fertile of a region than was given to the people of Israel. So.
Yeah, it's an interesting issue to look into, but so I appreciate that. Greg, you have any other thoughts on the content of Esau's blessing before we move forward?
No, I don't. It'll be interesting to see the results of the breaking of this yoke. Is this the good thing that perhaps the Edomites look forward to, or Esau would have looked forward to? It'll be interesting to see the results of that.
Well, we'll keep our eyes peeled for that. It's one of those issues we'll hopefully keep in the back of our mind as we continue in our biblical theology project. As we jump into chapter 28, let's try and maybe enter into a lightning round, so to speak. I think we've got 3 more issues to try and hit from this chapter. But immediately, Jacob is sent away. So he steals this blessing, but then it seems like he's thrust away from the family because of the hostility and the animosity, particularly that comes from his brother's response. Eric, why don't you start us off? Kind of what thoughts do you have about Jacob being sent away as a result of this successful stealing of the blessing?
Well, it was done for his protection because Esau wanted to kill him. And one thing that struck me as I was reading this is, where it says, after he's sent away, he says in verse, let's see, 16. This is Genesis 28:16. This is after he's sent away. He's in Bethel. Actually, the land was called Luz before it was named Bethel. But it says, then Jacob awoke from sleep. So he has this dream about these angels ascending and descending on this ladder that's stretched all the way from heaven to earth. And God speaks to him in the dream. And he wakes up, and he says in verse 16, surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And I found that really interesting because it's like, just because we don't feel God's presence doesn't mean that God is not there. This has some really practical implications. We can't go by our feelings all the time. I mean, yeah, sometimes our feelings are right, but I would say, they're definitely not something that we should be trusting the way that we trust the Word of God. Certainly not. I can speak from experience. More often than not, my feelings are wrong, and that's why I've learned to not trust them and to go by more reliable sources of truth. So, I just think it's interesting that Jacob, he's like, man, I wasn't thinking anything about God during this time, and then I have this dream, and God's right here, and these angels are descending and ascending on this ladder, and God speaks to me, and God's right here, and I didn't even know it at all the whole time. So I just think it's actually encouraging in a way, because it tells us that, if we don't feel like God is there, that does not mean that he's absent.
Yeah, for me, the things that jump out of this, it's kind of funny, right? The first is Jacob being sent away, and this instruction not to marry from among the Canaanite women is yet another reason for Esau to feel kind of slighted, and so as he sees this instruction, this is very important to Isaac, that Jacob, who's going to be the inheritor, does not go to Canaanite women, but instead sent back to find relatives. Esau again feels slighted and says, "Okay, fine. You're not happy with my wives. I'm going to go get a wife from the daughters of Ishmael." So I guess besides the slighted, was Esau still trying to please? Was he still trying to win the approval of his parents here? That just a question that raises up for me. And then the second thing, yes, Jacob seems to have a change of gears here. This dream experience where he seems to make this covenant with God. If you're going to take care of me, you will be my God. And while I have no doubt that he was raised knowing Yahweh and being taught to fear Yahweh, at least in chapter 27, verse 25, we see, verse 20, we see that he's willing to blaspheme against God, willing to lie, say God caused this thing to happen. This seems to be kind of his come to Jesus moment where, beforehand we could argue that he's willing to use God's name to lie, and here he's now committing himself to being a follower of Yahweh. So I think that's important.
Very interesting about this. You brought up verse 16. Let's move to the very next verse, verse 17. He has this vision, calls this place the gate of heaven. How do you interpret this, Eric? What thoughts do you have on verse 17?
This has puzzled me for a while. The first thing to note is that Jacob had a dream. This is a dream, and the imagery of the dream can be interpreted in more than one way. However, it's what God said in the dream that is most important. So we can interpret the ladder and the angels ascending and descending on it in more than one way, but the most important thing is what God actually says. The second thing I want to point out is it's absurd to me that there is an invisible ladder stretching from heaven to earth, as if angels need to climb down it to get to the earth. Maybe they do. The Bible never says angels have wings, so maybe they do need this giant ladder that's who knows how many miles long. That seems hard for me to believe. But this is just, we're going too far, I think, if we're drawing too many conclusions based on the imagery of the dream. I think the ladder was simply meant to reveal the importance of the land on which it was set, because it says in Genesis 28:13, it says, and behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord, the God of your father Abraham and the God of Isaac. The land on which you lie, I will give it to you and to your descendants. So it's the ladder was, stretching to the land that God would give Jacob and his descendants. So I think that's the point. That's the main point that's being made here, and I think that's the main takeaway we need to focus on.
Why is it absurd that there would be a ladder?
Well, it seems to me like a real. I don't know if real and spiritual is an oxymoron, but there's this gigantic ladder.
Greg would say if it's spiritual, it's even more real, I think.
Okay, well, it's a super real ladder.
At least a little real.
Yeah, it's an ultra real ladder that's stretching from heaven to earth, and angels are using it the way we would, just climbing it up and down on it. Are we to? I don't know. Are we to? How do you guys see this? Do you guys see this as like the angels really need ladders to go to the earth and go back up to heaven? I mean, what do you guys think?
That's a big question. I will tell you, and this will be a point of contention later on, surely. Prophetic visions, dream visions, are meant to be understood symbolically. Is how I read the grand sweep of things like this. Do I believe that there is a literal ladder there? No. Do I believe that this is the literal gate to heaven? No. I think Jesus is the gate. And so I don't read this text as a commentary on the importance of the land, like I think is what you were expressing. I read this as a commentary on the presence of God. That this place, he came to a place, this spot that seemed very much like every other spot he came to, but here is God, here is the presence. I don't read this about the land so much as about God.
So explain the symbol to us. I think you were already kind of touching on it, but what is the symbol? What's the substance of the symbol then?
Of the ladder?
I mean, if you said
I don't know.
Okay.
I don't have a firm, concrete, like, why did God show him a ladder? I won't speak with any great insight onto that.
Okay. Well,
I look forward to you doing so.
Well, I never claimed that I had a symbolic understanding of it, so I don't know that.
So is yours a literal, like?
Well, it is a curious passage. I think that it is very interesting to see that Jacob didn't seem to think that, back when he was with his family, didn't really seem to take God all that seriously. Now he comes here and he sees, God is even here in this place, kind of separated from where I thought. I think a lot of people, especially in the Old, they kind of thought about gods in a territorial fashion. We'll see that a lot of times throughout Scripture. I think that people tend to think that there's, the cultic gods or the regional gods. This god's in this area, this god's in the mountains, this god's in the valleys, blah, blah, blah. And other cultures have these ideas. This is the god of the sea, this is the god of the underworld, blah, whatever. Yahweh's the God of all the earth. And so here he is in a place that's desolate. He's separated from his family, and here it's the gate of heaven, and God is above. He's above even here. So I see this as more of a, if there is any, I don't think that's symbolic necessarily. He's just saying, okay, there's some sort of connection between heaven and earth, and God is ruling even over this place where he's been separated.
I guess that's what you've said is probably a better way to articulate of how I view it. Again,
sure.
If we want to say there's a literal way to read it, so there's a literal, mystical, spiritual ladder, I don't see it that way. So yeah, I guess
it says he's seeing it. Yeah, he's having this. This is like a dream, right?
Yeah, it's a dream. Yeah.
So I don't know how to. I think I've expressed to you guys probably off camera before. I don't necessarily. Dreams are very curious to me. Oftentimes we see things in dreams that are strange. Maybe even I'll use Eric's word again, absurd. And so maybe he was getting an absurdist picture to give him some sort of, he has a revelation about this of some kind to realize, okay, God's even God here. That's going to get us into our last issue about his relationship with God. It seems to take on a pretty significant moment. The light bulb's turned on, or Greg, as you said, he has this kind of come to Jesus moment, it seems. And so he understood that this meant that God is in this place, God is over this place, God is sovereign in this place. Should we think that there was if we had insight that there is a specific ladder in this one specific geographical region, I don't know that that's the intention of it. I don't know that that's a non-literal, the dream aspect does include something. We'll see many places, I'm sure, when dreams happen, that there is a figure that then intends us to understand something else. I don't know if this is any more absurd than fat and sleek cows, or nice and rotten corn, or statues.
I was thinking
else.
of those things earlier.
Sure.
What are you talking about?
Again, we're trying to get as many demerits as we possibly can as the show's coming to an end today. But
no, I guess I do want to point out that this is Bethel, right? Unless my research is incorrect, there is no place referred to in the Old Testament besides Jerusalem. No place besides Bethel more often referred to, except for Jerusalem. So this is an important site. Like this place does have significance. So I don't want to take away from that either. But
let me add this too, just to follow up with that. And we're not going to get into this. We don't have the time. But I just want to say that if this ladder is meant to be maybe more literal than Greg and I think, if that's the case, and these angels are literally ascending and descending on it, does that mean then that there's something very significant about this place, and there's some spiritual activity going on here that's not going on in other places? Is this some kind of I don't know, for lack of a better word, a gate between heaven and earth? I don't know. I don't have the answers to those, but if you're going to take it literally, you kind of have to ask those type of questions, as bizarre as they may sound. I'll just throw that out there just for the sake of our viewers.
Well, they can comment below if they have thoughts on that. We don't have the time to necessarily get into that. So let's just hit our final issue before we say goodbye. But certainly if other people want to keep the conversation go, the comment section is a wonderful place for you to do that. But let's talk about these last couple of verses here in chapter 28. It does describe Jacob's relationship with God.
I guess I'll just, the point that I already made, this seems to be a moment, or the moment where Jacob's trajectory towards God changes in some way. Whereas before he was willing to blaspheme against God, now he's, making this covenant, if you take care of me, if you'll be my God, I'll be yours kind of moment.
Yeah. I mean, he says, if you do such and such for me, then the Lord will be my God, implying that the Lord was not yet his God at this time. He was kind of putting God to the test. If you can take care of me, I will serve you. You'll be my God. But we're going to have to test that first. So it's like he didn't have the faith of he didn't have the kind of faith that Isaac and Abraham had, not yet anyway.
Well, let's go ahead and conclude our conversation there. As always, I appreciate your guys' thoughts and perspective. And to you, our viewer, we thank you for coming along on this Biblical Theology Project discussion, conversation as we're going through. Of course, our intention isn't to try and answer every single question. We couldn't possibly do that. But as we lay this broad foundation, we are trying to get the general sweep. But is there anything we talked about that you have thoughts on, comment below. If there's things that we didn't bring up that you would have liked to hear us talk about, you can put those in the comments below, and maybe we can have some interaction down there. And if you want to continue in this and you haven't subscribed already, go ahead and do that. It's free, and we will be back again next week with another conversation. And until we see you again, get equipped, obey your King, and glorify your God.
It's absurd to me